Colombia, one of the world's most powerful and violent drug traffickers, has spent his first full day in jail, and a very comfortable jail.
One of the richest men in the world, rich and ruthless enough.
When most people imagine life in jail, they think of empty rooms and harsh conditions. But for some folks, their time behind bars was nothing like that. In fact, they managed to turn their prison cells into luxurious spaces. Living in a way that goes against the usual rules of confinement. Let's take a look at how these kings of prison, like the notorious Hells Angels biker club, made their rooms into havens of comfort and luxury, even though they were in jail. John Gotti. What better way to kickstart than with the story of John Gotti, the notorious Teflon Don who enjoyed the service of fellow inmates with well-furnished prison walls. John Joseph Gotti Jr. was a man whose name commanded both fear and respect in the hearts of many. When you talk of organized crime, three names will never be mentioned without him taking the lead. He had a determined spirit and an uncanny ability to outsmart his rivals, making him a formidable leader of the Gambino crime family in New York City. Gotti's rise to power wasn't an easy one. He and his brothers grew up in poverty, surrounded by the harsh realities of life. They turned to a life of crime at a young age, seeking a way out of their circumstances. It didn't take long for Gotti to make a name for himself in the Gambino family, quickly becoming one of their top earners. He was a protege of Emilio Della Croce, the family's underboss, and operated out of Ozone Park, Queens. As Gotti's wealth and influence grew, so did his ambitions. However, his success came at a price. The FBI had been keeping a close eye on Gotti and his crew, particularly for their involvement in the drug trade. Gotti began to fear that his actions would draw the ire of Gambino boss Paul Castellano, who disapproved of dealing drugs. This fear, coupled with growing dissent over Castellano's leadership, pushed Gotti to make a bold and dangerous move. In December 1985, Gotti orchestrated the murder of Castellano. It was a meticulously planned operation that sent goosebumps through the criminal underworld. With Castellano out of the picture, Gotti swiftly took over the Gambino family, becoming its new boss. Overnight, he became one of the most powerful and dangerous crime bosses in the United States. What set Gotti apart from his peers was his flamboyant personality and love for the limelight. While other mobsters preferred to stay under the radar, Gotti embraced the media attention. He earned the nickname the Dapper Don for his impeccable fashion sense and expensive clothes. Whenever news cameras were around, Gotti was sure to make his presence known, often speaking his mind with an unapologetic confidence. But it wasn't just his style that made Gotti stand out. He also earned the moniker the Teflon Don, due to his ability to evade conviction. In the 1980s, he faced 3 high-profile trials that resulted in acquittals, despite overwhelming evidence against him. It was later revealed that those trials had been tainted by jury tampering, juror misconduct, and witness intimidation. Law enforcement agencies, however, were relentless in their pursuit of Gotti. They continued to gather evidence against him, determined to bring him to justice. One of Gotti's own trusted underbosses, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, turned state's witness and provided crucial testimony that led to Gotti's downfall. In 1992, Gotti was finally convicted on charges of murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and more. Sentenced to life in prison without parole. Gotti's reign as the Teflon Don came to an end. He was transferred to the United States Penitentiary in Marion, where he would spend the remainder of his days. Despite being incarcerated, Gotti's notoriety lingered. His name was still whispered in hushed tones, and his legacy as a formidable crime boss continued to captivate the public imagination. According to reports, his cell was adorned with comfortable furnishings, creating an environment of indulgence that contrasted sharply with the standard prison experience. Gotti seemed to have access to amenities and privileges that were beyond the reach of ordinary inmates. It was said that he had inmates at his beck and call, cooking, cleaning his cell, and even doing his laundry. He rarely went to the dining hall, as other inmates would bring him food or cook for him. Gotti's cell became a symbol of his power and influence, a reminder of his reign as a mob prince. During his time in prison, Gotti was constantly surrounded by members and associates of organized crime who catered to his every need. He was accompanied by a particular inmate, Michael Bellino, a reputed Colombo associate, and the two spent a considerable amount of time together in the weight room. Gotti's visits with underlings and a lawyer were also closely monitored by the prison, as they helped the FBI gather evidence against him. But on June 10, 2002, Gotti's life came to a close as he succumbed to throat cancer at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. His death marked the end of an era, but the impact he had on the world of organized crime would not be easily forgotten. Some, like Anthony Gaspipe Casso, the former underboss of the Lucchese crime family, believe that Gotti's actions marked the beginning of the end for Cosa Nostra, the Italian-American mafia. Al Capone. Most Americans in the 1920s and 30s remember Al Capone as a notorious gangster, also known as Scarface Al and Public Enemy Number 1. When he arrived at Alcatraz in late August 1934, he took on a more humbling name, Prisoner 85. As Prisoner 85, Al Capone lived a very different life compared to his previous days as a powerful figure in the Chicago criminal world. He became a serious reader, a musician, and a composer. He was a model prisoner, keeping a low profile, doing his assigned prison tasks, and rarely resorting to violence unless provoked. There was one instance where he struck another inmate's head with a bedpan after being provoked, but that's, by the way, compared to the luxury this guy enjoys in prison. While it would be an exaggeration to call Al Capone a Renaissance man during his time in Alcatraz, he seemed to have lived up to his promise to reform his evil ways, at least temporarily. Alphonse Gabriel Capone was an American gangster and businessman who became notorious during the Prohibition era as the co-founder and leader of the Chicago outfit from 1925 to 1931. His reign as a crime boss came to an end when he went to prison at the age of 33. Capone was born in New York City in 1899 to Italian immigrants. As a teenager, he joined the 5 Points Gang and worked as a bouncer in various organized crime establishments, including brothels. In his early 20s, he moved to Chicago and became a trusted bodyguard and assistant to Johnny Torrio, the head of a criminal syndicate involved in the illegal alcohol trade. This syndicate eventually evolved into the Chicago Outfit, enjoyed political protections through the Union Siciliana. Capone's rise and fall were influenced by a conflict with the North Side Gang. After an attempt on Torrio's life, Capone took control. He expanded the bootlegging business through increasingly violent means, but maintained mutually beneficial relationships with Mayor William Hale Thompson and the Chicago Police Department, which made him seemingly untouchable by law enforcement. Capone reveled in attention and was known for his flamboyant public appearances, such as attending baseball games where he would receive cheers from spectators. He made donations to charities and was seen by some as a modern-day Robin Hood. However, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, in which 7 rival gang members were brutally murdered in broad daylight, tarnished Chicago's image and Capone's reputation. This led to influential citizens demanding government action and newspapers dubbing Capone Public Enemy Number 1. Federal authorities were determined to imprison Capone and charged him with 22 counts of tax evasion. He was convicted on 5 accounts in 1931. During the highly publicized trial, Capone's omissions of income and unpaid taxes made during previous negotiations with the government were admitted as evidence. Capone was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. After his conviction, he replaced his defense team with tax law experts, and while his grounds for appeal were strengthened by a Supreme Court ruling, his appeal ultimately failed. Now, you might think that being locked up in that place would be a total nightmare, but oh no, you'd be wrong. His cell was nothing like your typical prison cell. We're talking about comfortable furnishings, private bathrooms, the works. Do you know that he even served gourmet meals? Luxuries that were beyond imagination in the world of incarceration. Can you imagine having all that opulence while serving time? So you might be wondering, how the heck did Capone end up with such royal treatment? Well, it turns out his influence extended even within the walls of Alcatraz. The guards, whether out of fear or being enticed, catered to his every desire. They were practically at his command and service. That's how he managed to have a cushy cell and all these privileges that set him apart from the rest of the prison population. After some time, Capone showed signs of neurosyphilis early in his sentence and deteriorated further before being released after nearly 8 years of incarceration. He died of cardiac arrest after suffering a stroke in 1947. Sonny Barger. Sonny Barger was a prominent figure in the world of motorcycle clubs, particularly the Hells Angels. He became a symbol of defiance and loyalty within the notorious Hells Angels Brotherhood. Barger joined the Hells Angels in the 1960s and quickly rose through the ranks, eventually becoming the club's national president. His reputation for being tough and committed to the club earned him respect from other members and fame among the police. However, Barger's life took an unexpected turn when he was sent to federal prison in 1988. Despite being confined behind prison walls, Barger maintained an air of power and continued to behave like a boss. He garnered admiration from both fellow prisoners and guards. and his charisma and leadership skills helped him navigate the complex social dynamics within the jail. Barger's time in prison was not just about survival. He remained influential within the Hells Angels organization and maintained contact with people outside the group. During his time in jail, Barger lived in relative luxury compared to other prisoners. Before we explore the realities of life in the prison, let's rewind a little to live with the Hells Angels. This guy played a big role in bringing different Hells Angels chapters together and officially incorporating the club in 1966. During the counterculture movement, Sonny Barger became the most well-known member of the Hells Angels, although he denied being the club's international president. People had different opinions about Sonny Barger. Hunter Thompson, a writer, called him the maximum leader of the Hells Angels, while Philip Martin from the Phoenix New Times considered him the ultimate Hells Angel, saying he shaped the club's image. Barger wrote several books and appeared on television and in movies. However, Barger had some serious legal troubles. He spent a total of 13 years in prison. In 1974, he was convicted of trafficking heroin, and in 1988, he was convicted of conspiring to bomb a rival motorcycle gang's clubhouse, the Outlaws. He was also accused of murder in 1972 and racketeering in 1980, but was acquitted on both charges. Barger always denied that the Hells Angels were a criminal organization, believed individuals should be responsible for their actions, not the club as a whole. 1980, Barger and 9 other Hells Angels were extradited to Kentucky to stand trial for conspiring to transport firearms and explosives across state lines. The trial was held in Louisville, and during that time, Barger's wife worked on his defense team. Many Hells Angels attended the trial, and even country singer Johnny Paycheck, a friend of Barger, showed up. The trial involved intense security measures, with U.S. Marshals providing protection and prosecutors being deputized to carry guns inside the courthouse. The government argued that the Hells Angels were a highly organized criminal group involved in drug trafficking, shootings, and bombings. The defense team tried to show misconduct by the government and discredit a key witness, Anthony Tate. After a 3-month trial, Barger and another defendant, Michael O'Farrell, were convicted in 1988 on the charge of conspiracy to transport explosives. Barger received a prison sentence of 57 months and was sent to the Federal Correctional Institute in Phoenix, Arizona. While in prison, he started running as a form of exercise and received numerous interview requests, which he turned down to protect a screenplay about his life. Barger had a sense of humor even in prison. He sent a Christmas card to one of the prosecutors, Cleve Gamble, with a picture of him pretending to be on a beach and the message, "Nice weather. Wish you were here." Barger developed a liking for the Arizona desert and said, "I dig the desert. It's the new California. It's wide and free." Despite his time behind bars, Sonny Barger's influence on the Hells Angels and his place in biker culture remained significant. His cell was stocked with extras, resembling a nice home rather than a typical jail cell. He had access to personal TVs, gourmet meals, quality food, and even a private area. Barger's ability to maintain power and respect, both inside and outside of jail, showcased his strength and determination. Despite controversies and legal troubles throughout his life, Barger remained a central figure within the club and helped establish the Hells Angels as a worldwide brand. Nikki Barnes. This man, named Leroy Nikki Barnes, became famous as Mr. Untouchable due to his ability to maneuver legal tussles. He was a notorious drug dealer in New York during the 1970s. Barnes helped establish a criminal group called The Council, which controlled a significant portion of the city's heroin trade. However, as is often the case in organized crime, the law eventually caught up with him in 1978. In 1978, Nikki Barnes was apprehended and found guilty of drug dealing charges. He was sentenced to jail, but even in that confined environment, he defied expectations. Through manipulation and the cooperation of corrupt prison guards, he maintained a level of comfort akin to living in his own home. This allowed him to continue running his criminal operations and showcase his influence. Barnes was born on October 15, 1933, in New York City. From an early age, he began selling drugs, and his involvement with the street gang led to a heroin addiction. In 1950, he was arrested for having a hypodermic needle and later for possessing burglary tools and breaking into cars. These crimes landed him a 3-year sentence at the Manhattan House of Corrections, also known as the Tombs. After his release in 1954, Barnes returned to his drug-dealing activities. However, his actions caught up with him, and he was arrested again in 1955 on drug charges. This time, he received a 5-year sentence at Green Haven State Prison. It was during this time in prison that Barnes embraced Islam and studied law journals. He also formed a connection with a reputed mafia figure called Crazy Joey Gallo. Barnes was released on appeal in 1971, and he was determined to build a massive drug empire. Inspired by the Italian mafia, he gathered a group of African-American drug dealers and formed the Council. The Council made important decisions about suppliers and how to handle difficult situations. Barnes held significant power within the group. Prominent members included Frank James, Ishmael Muhammad, Joseph Jazz Hayden, Thomas Gaps Foreman, and Guy Fisher. Their motto was to treat each other with respect and fairness. With the vast amounts of money he made from his illegal activities, Barnes lived a lavish lifestyle. He frequented nightclubs, had multiple girlfriends, and drove expensive cars such as Mercedes and Citroen Maseratis. Law enforcement kept a close eye on him, but Barnes enjoyed leading them on wild chases. He also had an extensive wardrobe with hundreds of custom-made suits, leather coats, and shoes. However, Barnes faced numerous legal troubles. In 1974, he was arrested in connection with the murder of Clifford Haynes, who had taken off with money belonging to the council. Barnes claimed that Haynes was killed for information about his sister's whereabouts. Later that year, Barnes was pulled over by police, and they discovered a large sum of cash in his car. The police accused Barnes of attempting to bribe them, but he denied the allegations. In 1976, he was arrested again for possessing illegal weapons. However, his luck ran out on March 1977 when he was arrested on narcotics conspiracy charges, along with several associates. He was also charged with running a continuing criminal enterprise. Before his trial, Barnes appeared on the cover of the New York Times Magazine with an article titled Mr. Untouchable. President Jimmy Carter read the article and urged prosecutors to ensure Barnes' conviction. In September 1977, Barnes and his co-conspirators, including Guy Fisher, faced trial. The prosecution, led by United States Attorney Robert B. Fisk, Jr., presented evidence the defendants had been selling around $1 million worth of heroin each month from a garage in Harlem. After a 2-month trial, Barnes and 10 others were found guilty, while Fisher was acquitted. On January 19, 1987, Barnes received a life sentence without parole and was sent to Marion Federal Penitentiary in Illinois. Eventually, he decided to testify against some of his former associates, including Guy Fisher, in the hope of a reduced sentence. In an interview with rival drug kingpin Frank Lucas, Barnes expressed his feeling of betrayal by Fisher, who had become involved with a woman Barnes had trusted him to take care of. But during his time behind bars, he lived in a level of comfort akin to residing in his own home. Corrupt guards were always at his beck and call, fulfilling his every demand. This allowing his influence to transcend the prison walls, he continued to pull the strings, maintaining his operations and showcasing his power. Furthermore, the furnishings within his cell were fit for royalty. Silk sheets adorned the bed, exquisite paintings embellished the walls, and gourmet meals were occasionally served. There was no semblance of the harsh reality of prison life within this sanctuary, and so Leroy Nikki Barnes' life was filled with highs and lows, from his rise as Mr. Untouchable to his ultimate downfall. El Chapo. Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman Loera, also known as El Chapo and JGL, is a former Mexican drug lord and leader of the Sinaloa cartel, a powerful international crime organization. He was considered one of the most influential and dangerous drug traffickers in the world. Guzman was born and raised in Sinaloa, Mexico, in a poor farming family. His childhood was marked by physical abuse from his father. Unfortunately, Guzman followed in his father's footsteps and became involved in the drug trade. During his early adulthood, he helped his father grow marijuana for local dealers. In the late 1970s, Guzman began working with Hector Luis Palma Salazar, a prominent drug lord at the time. Together, they plotted routes to transport drugs through Sinaloa and into the United States. Later on, Guzman became involved with Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, another major figure in the drug trade during the mid-1980s. However, after Felix's arrest, Guzman established his own cartel in 1988. Under Guzman's leadership, the cartel engaged in the production, smuggling, and distribution of large quantities of cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana, and heroin. These drugs were primarily sent to the United States and Europe, where there was high demand. Guzman was known for his innovative strategies, such as using distribution cells and constructing long-range tunnels near borders. These tactics allowed him to transport more drugs into the United States than any other trafficker in history. His position as the head of the cartel brought him immense wealth and power, with Forbes ranking him as one of the most influential people in the world from 2009 to 2013. The Drug Enforcement Administration even likened his influence and wealth to that of Pablo Escobar. Guzman's criminal activities eventually caught up with him, though. He was first arrested in 1993 in Guatemala and was extradited to Mexico, where he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for murder and drug trafficking. However, he managed to escape from a maximum security prison in 2001 by bribing multiple prison guards. His escape led to a massive manhunt. Both Mexico and the United States offered a combined reward of $8.8 million for information leading to his capture. Then in 2014, Guzman was arrested again in Mexico, but he escaped once more in 2015 through a tunnel that was dug into his jail cell by associates. After a dramatic shootout, Mexican authorities recaptured Guzman in January 2016. He was subsequently extradited to the United States a year later. In 2019, he was found guilty of numerous criminal charges related to his leadership of the Sinaloa cartel. Guzman was sentenced to life imprisonment and is currently incarcerated in ADX Florence, a high-security federal prison in Colorado, United States. However, when he was finally apprehended in Mexico, he transformed the jail into his kingdom. He manipulated numerous aspects to favor himself, living a lavish lifestyle, making decisions, hosting extravagant parties, and enjoying various luxuries, including the company of women. El Chapo detested being locked up and saw prison as an obstacle to his goal of controlling the global drug trade. His numerous escapes, while showcasing his disdain for captivity, ultimately led to his downfall. Mexican authorities informed him that he would be extradited to the United States, where he knew he would face a different reality. The corruption tactics that had helped him maintain control in Mexico were ineffective within the U.S. prison system. El Chapo learned a harsh lesson when he experienced the stark contrast between Mexican and U.S. jails. In the U.S., he received a life sentence and had to contend with harsh conditions devoid of the comforts he had enjoyed in Mexico. He now aims to caution other drug lords about the perils of excessive ambition through his own experiences. Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar, the notorious drug lord known as the King of Coke, agreed to a prison sentence in Colombia, but he did it on his own terms. He built a jail that was so luxurious it was nicknamed Hotel Escobar or Club Medellin, although it is more commonly referred to as La Catedral or the Cathedral. La Catedral was not your typical prison. It had amenities like a football field, jacuzzi, and waterfall. In fact, it was more like a fortress than a prison. Escobar designed it in a way that kept his enemies out, allowing him to continue his criminal activities behind bars. Back in the year 1976, Escobar started the Medellin cartel, which distributed cocaine and established smuggling routes from Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador through Colombia to the United States. His actions led to a high demand for cocaine in the U.S., and he became incredibly wealthy. However, he faced constant conflicts with rival cartels, both in Colombia and internationally. These conflicts resulted in massacres and the killings of police officers, judges, locals, and politicians. In the 1982 Colombian parliamentary election, Escobar was elected as an alternate member of the Chamber of Representatives under the Liberal Party. He used his position to carry out community projects such as building houses and football fields, which made him popular among the local people. However, Escobar's political aspirations were hindered by the Colombian and U.S. governments, who actively sought out his arrest. It was widely believed that Escobar orchestrated bombings in retaliation for their efforts. In 1991, Escobar surrendered to the authorities and received a 5-year prison sentence for various crimes. He struck a deal with Colombian President Cesar Gaviria, ensuring that he would not be extradited. After a deadlock between Escobar and the authorities, a new policy was tentatively agreed upon: negotiated surrender. The terms of surrender included Escobar and his associates ceasing their acts of terrorism in Colombia and surrendering themselves to the authorities. In return, they were promised that they would not be extradited to the United States, where Escobar would face trial in a U.S. court, something he wanted to avoid. During the negotiations, Escobar added conditions to the surrender agreement. These included reducing his jail time to 5 years and serving his sentence in a prison that he built himself. He also ensured that he would be surrounded by hand-picked guards and protected from his enemies by Colombian soldiers. Escobar fulfilled his part of the agreement and turned himself in a few days later. President Cesar Gaviria declared that Escobar would be treated no differently than what the law required. However, in 1992, he escaped when authorities attempted to transfer him to a different prison. This led to a nationwide manhunt. As a result of Escobar's escape, the Medellin cartel crumbled. In 1993, he was killed in his hometown by the Colombian National Police, one day after his 44th birthday. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.